There is a reason some people enter a room, and something shifts. No announcement, no dramatic posture, no demand for attention. Yet conversations recalibrate, voices lower slightly, eye contact adjusts. Nothing visible happens, but something structural does. And then there are others. They speak louder. They assert more. They try to dominate space with presence. Yet nothing truly moves around them. They chase authority. They pursue recognition. They compete for status. But they never quite hold it. This difference is not charisma. It is not talent. It is not even confidence. It is alignment with a rule most people never consciously detect. A rule that operates beneath hierarchy, beneath conversation, beneath visible power itself. Machiavelli understood it, but he never isolated it in a single declaration. Instead, he wove it through restraint, through calculated silence, through the art of perception. Because the moment you attempt to describe this rule directly, it begins to dissolve. The invisible power rule cannot be performed, it can only be embodied, and that is why most fail. They try to look powerful. They try to sound powerful. They try to act powerful. But real power does not perform. It shapes. It does not demand recognition. It redirects energy. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Power is not seized in the moment you assert yourself. It is transferred in the moment others unconsciously adjust to you. That adjustment, that subtle recalibration of behavior, is the real currency of influence. Most people never see it happening, but once you understand it, you begin to notice something unsettling. The strongest person in the room is rarely the one speaking, and the one shaping the outcome is rarely the one appearing to lead. That is the rule. And once you see it, you will never enter a room the same way again. Most people are trained to recognize power by its surface. Titles, status symbols, the person at the head of the table, the loudest voice in the discussion. We are conditioned to assume authority is visible, but Machiavelli observed something far more unsettling. The appearance of power is often theater. The visible ruler may sit on the throne, but the true architect operates in shadow. History repeats this pattern endlessly. The figure with the crown commands attention. The strategist beside him commands direction. The executive signs the decision. And the advisor shaped the decision hours earlier. The dominant speaker controls the volume. The quiet observer controls the interpretation. This is the first fracture in the illusion. Power is rarely located where attention is directed. And this is why most people miscalculate their entire strategy. They compete for visibility. They chase validation. They fight for symbolic dominance. But symbolic dominance is fragile. It requires maintenance. It invites challenge. It attracts resistance. Structural influence, however, moves differently. It does not need to be defended. It does not announce itself. It operates beneath conflict. When you understand this, you stop asking, who is in charge? You begin asking, who is shaping the frame? Because the one shaping the frame defines the boundaries of what is possible. Machiavelli never advised rulers to simply overpower opponents. He advised them to structure perception, alliances, and outcomes long before confrontation appeared. He understood something timeless. If you control the architecture, you never need to control the noise. And here is where the invisible rule begins to reveal itself. The one who appears powerful may be reacting. The one who appears quiet may be structuring. Learn to observe that difference, and your entire understanding of hierarchy changes. If this perspective is sharpening how you see rooms, systems, and power dynamics, subscribe. Because we are not studying surface authority here, we are studying structure. And once you see structure, you stop chasing the spotlight. You start building gravity. Events by themselves are neutral. A mistake happens. A silence falls. A challenge is made. a delay occurs. None of these carry inherent meaning. Meaning is assigned, and whoever assigns the meaning controls the direction that follows. This is the rule of interpretation. Most people believe power is about controlling actions, but actions are downstream. Interpretation is upstream. If a setback is interpreted as weakness, confidence collapses. If that same setback is framed as calculation, patience, or strategy, perception stabilizes, and perception dictates behavior. Machiavelli understood that influence does not begin at confrontation. It begins at narrative. If you define what something represents, you define how others emotionally respond to it, and emotional response determines alignment. This is why public figures survive scandal, not because nothing happened, but because interpretation was shaped. And this is why leaders maintain authority after errors, not because they are flawless, but because they control framing. Most people surrender power the moment something unexpected occurs. They rush to explain. They rush to defend. They rush to clarify. In doing so, they allow others to define the narrative first, and the first dominant interpretation becomes structural truth. The invisible power rule operates quietly here. Never let the first interpretation form without your presence. Sometimes that means speaking first. Sometimes it means waiting. So your response becomes the definitive one. Silence can frame just as effectively as speech. If someone insults you and you react emotionally, the interpretation becomes obvious. You were affected. If you remain unmoved, ambiguity enters the room, and ambiguity destabilizes attackers. And the person who controls meaning controls momentum. Because once a narrative is accepted, people adjust their behavior to match it. That is the mechanism. Machiavelli never wrote, "Control interpretation," but he repeatedly demonstrated it, shaped the story, shaped the perception, shaped the outcome. Power does not begin with force, it begins with definition. And the one who defines what events mean quietly defines what happens next. In every interaction, there is a silent exchange happening beneath the words. It is not about logic. It is not about intelligence. It is about regulation. The person who controls their emotional state controls the tempo of the room. Most people believe power is expressed through dominance, but dominance without emotional control is unstable. Anger reveals sensitivity. Defensiveness reveals insecurity. Over-explanation reveals anxiety, and anxiety lowers perceived authority immediately. This is where emotional gravity enters. Gravity does not chase, it does not force, it simply pulls. When you remain composed under pressure, something subtle occurs. Others begin adjusting themselves around you. Their tone shifts, their posture recalibrates, their aggression softens or intensifies, but always in reaction to you. This is hierarchy being formed in real time. The first person to lose emotional stability unconsciously lowers their position. Why? Because reaction signals dependency. If someone can provoke you easily, they can move you. And if they can move you emotionally, they hold leverage. Machiavelli admired restraint not because it looked noble, but because it preserved positional advantage. The ruler who explodes publicly creates vulnerability. The strategist who absorbs tension without visible disturbance increases perceived depth. Stillness under pressure creates ambiguity, and ambiguity creates respect. When you do not react immediately, people begin calculating. What are they thinking? Did that affect them? Are they planning something? The absence of visible emotion becomes psychological space, and space creates projection. Projection creates elevation. This is the invisible rule strengthening again. Emotional stability is not about suppressing feeling. It is about controlling timing. You may feel anger, you may feel insult, But when you decide when and whether that emotion becomes visible, you maintain structural power, because the calmest person in a tense moment becomes the reference point, and the reference point becomes the center. Power does not rise from intensity. It rises from immovability. That is emotional gravity. And once you master it, rooms stop testing you. They begin orbiting you. Most people misunderstand influence. They equate it with persuasion, or pressure, or dominance. But direct pressure creates resistance. The moment someone feels pushed, their instinct is to defend autonomy. And the need to defend autonomy creates friction. Friction exposes effort. Effort exposes intention, and visible intention invites opposition. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology confirmed it. People resist control, but they rarely resist their own decisions. That distinction changes everything. The highest form of influence does not feel imposed, it feels self-directed. And when someone believes an idea is theirs, they defend it. When they believe a conclusion was self-reached, they commit to it. The invisible power rule operates here with precision. Guide direction without appearing to guide it. This requires patience. It requires restraint. It requires the discipline to avoid claiming authorship. Most people destroy influence because they want recognition for it. They want to be seen as the strategist. They want credit for the idea. They want acknowledgement of control. But acknowledgement reduces subtlety, and subtlety is insulation. Machiavelli advised rulers to let outcomes appear natural, inevitable, even accidental, because inevitability does not create friction. It creates acceptance. If you push someone into a corner, they will resist. If you open a path and allow them to walk through it voluntarily, they will align. Influence without friction works through environment, through suggestion, through timing, through selective silence. Sometimes it is a well-placed question. Sometimes it is withholding opposition until others argue your position for you. Sometimes it is creating conditions where only one outcome feels logical. The key is invisibility. The moment influence becomes obvious, it becomes vulnerable. But when influence feels organic, it becomes unchallengeable. The invisible rule deepens here: control the structure, not the surface. Because surface control creates struggle, structural control creates flow, and power that flows does not need to fight. Value is rarely measured objectively. It is perceived, and perception is shaped by availability. The more accessible something becomes, the less it is subconsciously valued. And this applies to resources, it applies to opportunities, it applies to people. Most individuals erode their own position because they oversupply access. They respond immediately, they explain excessively, they make themselves constantly reachable. Availability feels polite, it feels cooperative, it feels socially correct. But psychologically it lowers perceived rarity. And rarity signals value. Machiavelli understood that leaders must be seen but not constantly reachable. If a ruler is too accessible, authority dissolves into familiarity. Familiarity invites testing. Testing invites challenge. Scarcity, however, changes the dynamic. When attention is distributed selectively, it becomes currency. When validation is offered sparingly, it becomes meaningful. When presence is not guaranteed, it becomes sought after. And this is not about manipulation, it is about structural psychology. Desire increases in the presence of uncertainty. If someone knows they have unlimited access to you, they relax their effort. If access feels conditional, behavior adjusts. They become more careful, more attentive, more invested. Scarcity creates psychological gravity. This is why powerful figures do not over-explain themselves. They do not chase approval. They do not overcommit to proving their value, because proving value implies doubt, and doubt lowers perception. The invisible power rule strengthens again. Never flood the room with your presence. Let your presence feel measured. Let your attention feel intentional. Let your engagement feel earned. When you become too easy to access, you become easy to evaluate. When you become selective, you become harder to measure. And what cannot be easily measured often becomes elevated. Scarcity is not withdrawal, it is controlled distribution. And controlled distribution builds perceived worth. The one who is not always available becomes the one most considered. And consideration is the beginning of influence. Clarity builds comfort, but comfort does not always build authority. Most people believe transparency earns trust, and to a degree it does, but total transparency also creates exposure. When everything about you is predictable, you become easy to assess. When you are easy to assess, you are easy to challenge. Controlled ambiguity operates differently. It is not deception. It is not dishonesty. It is calibrated revelation. You reveal enough to establish credibility, but never so much that your full depth can be measured. Machiavelli repeatedly emphasized unpredictability. Not chaos, but strategic opacity. If your intentions are obvious, opponents prepare. If your emotional reactions are predictable, others manipulate. If your thinking patterns are transparent, you become readable. And readability lowers leverage. Ambiguity creates projection. When people cannot fully decode you, they fill the gaps themselves. And those projections often elevate you beyond what you would have claimed directly. Mystery creates psychological distance. Distance creates respect. Respect reduces testing. This is the invisible rule operating at its most subtle. It is the discipline of withholding unnecessary clarity. You do not explain every decision. You do not reveal every preference. You do not react in ways that establish patterns. Yet you allow others to remain slightly uncertain, not uncomfortable, uncertain. Because uncertainty keeps attention engaged. It keeps people calculating. It keeps them cautious. The powerful rarely reveal all of their strategy, not because they fear exposure, but because mystery is insulation. The more predictable you are, the more control others gain over you. The less predictable you are, the more carefully others move around you. Controlled ambiguity is restraint. It is measured silence. It is allowing your presence to feel deeper than what is immediately visible. And once you understand this, you stop trying to be fully understood. You focus on being strategically interpreted. Because the one who cannot be fully decoded cannot be easily displaced. That is controlled ambiguity. And it is one of the final layers of the invisible power rule. Now you can see it. The invisible rule was never about aggression, never about domination, never about being the loudest presence in the room. It was about structure. Power is not seized in dramatic moments. It is transferred quietly, through perception, through restraint, through subtle alignment. The one who controls interpretation shapes direction. The one who controls emotional timing controls tension. The one who influences without friction shapes outcomes. The one who distributes attention selectively increases value. The one who remains partially undefined preserves leverage. None of these require force, and that is precisely why they work. The moment you try to prove power, you expose insecurity. The moment you compete for dominance, you signal equality. And the moment you react impulsively, you surrender control. True power does not announce itself. It does not chase recognition. It does not demand validation. It creates a field, and once that field exists, others move within it, adjusting, aligning, recalibrating. Often without understanding why. That is the transfer. That is the mechanism. That is the rule Machiavelli never isolated into a sentence, but demonstrated repeatedly through strategy, restraint, and perception. And once you internalize it, something changes. You stop trying to win rooms. You start structuring them. You stop reacting to pressure. You start absorbing it. You stop chasing authority. You start becoming difficult to move. This is not manipulation. It is awareness. It is understanding the invisible architecture beneath hierarchy. And if this perspective sharpened the way you see power, influence, and human behavior, subscribe, because we are not studying surface-level confidence here. We are dissecting structure, and once you understand structure, you no longer enter spaces hoping to be respected. You enter already aligned with the rule, and those who understand the rule rarely need to explain themselves.